I already said this. Welcome to the June book party with bonus movies this time. My name is Allison Cochran. I'm an advisory librarian with Arapahoe Libraries, and we will introduce ourselves. Kate is up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant I was giving a film talk right away. No, I'm
No.
Kate. I'm the media collection librarian. So I recently joined the collection department, but yeah, I handle movies and CDs.
Julie.
I'm Pamela.
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to throw in Julie.
Oh.
Julie Lupo is our adult fiction collection librarian who buys all the fiction for the library. She is stuck behind a stopped train, but will be joining us as soon as possible. So, go ahead, Pamela.
She will give some great book talks when she gets here. And I'm Pamela, and I work with Allison for adult advisory, book clubs, book talks, trainings, things like that.
Okay. I'm Tegan. I'm a reference librarian at Mogul.
Okay. So I'm going to go first. And my first book is The Puzzler by A.J. Jacobs. It's nonfiction. You might know A.J. Jacobs. He's the author of The Year of Living Biblically and The Know-It-All. The Know-It-All is when he tried to read the Encyclopedia Britannica from cover to cover. He has described himself as a human guinea pig because of the types of books he does, where he immerses himself in these different challenges for a year or more. In this one, he takes on puzzles of all kinds: jigsaw, crosswords, Rubik's cubes. This one, he did not have to try a whole new lifestyle because he is a puzzle nerd. It was very enjoyable. I especially enjoyed the chapter on Rubik's cubes, even though I personally despise them. It was really fascinating. I often will tell you, listen to the book on audio, but in this case, do not. Even though there is a PDF where you can get some of the puzzles, it just doesn't work out. Do the book, because there are all sorts of little quizzes and riddles throughout the book that are best experienced if you at least have a moment to think about them. But a lot of fun.
All right. So this is our first film talk. Teke Hintakwa is a 13-year-old Indigenous girl in Montreal. Her native name is too hard to pronounce, so she simply goes by Beans. The film opens to her interviewing for a private school, step one of the dream her mom has for her to get out of the impoverished reservation life. But is this what Beans wants? She's faced with watering down her Indigenousness to try to fit into the white education system. This dream comes crashing down on her as her people, two Mohawk communities, protest the government selling burial ground to developers by closing down a main bridge that connects areas of Montreal. This is based on the Oka crisis in 1990. Beans and her family attend one of the first protests and are bombed by police, the first of a string of violence against her and her people. Next, they are denied service at local stores, leaving their families without food. Locals spit on them as they walk through town, and they throw rocks and swing bats at their vehicles as they drive through. The local police call in the Canadian Army to crescendo the violence, and women and children evacuate, anticipating the fighting to reach a new dangerous high. Beans has had enough. Instead of behaving respectfully like her mother demands, she goes to the local bully girl and learns to become a tough kid. What Beans learns after becoming one of the mean girls is that violence is pointless and only leads to more violence. This film was extremely emotional. Watching Beans' little sister pick glass out of her hair after a protester smashed in their car windows with a baseball bat, or just the stress of finding temporary housing for an entire tribe of displaced women and children, or seeing white protesters throw explosives into a crowd of unsuspecting Indigenous people was heart-wrenching. I highly recommend this Indigenous coming-of-age film, as it not only sheds light on the continuing tense relations between settlers and Indigenous folks, but it's just a heartwarming story about Beans learning to be tough. Personally, this is a piece of history I had not heard about, and I highly recommend it as follow-up research. I highly recommend as a follow-up to the research of the Oka crisis and similar native settler tensions.
Oh, Thank you. Shadows of Pecan Hollow by Caroline Frost is her debut novel, and yet it's so well written. I would not have guessed she hadn't published other books. In this one, Kit is an orphan, and she's moving her way through the foster system. And in 1970, when she is 13, she runs away. She's had enough of the foster family. She meets seemingly nice and fatherly Manny Romero. He's older and a low-level criminal, and the two of them become partners in robberies all over Texas. Later, in the early 1990s, Kit is living a quiet life in the small town of Pecan Hollow with her teenage daughter, and Manny shows up. He's out of jail. He tries to convince Kit he is a changed man, but is he? This is for those readers who like Southern novels and the books which examine the nature of love, families, what makes up a family, and the possibility of redemption. So I would recommend Shadows of Pecan Hollow.
Next, we have When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. This was published in May of this year. Kelly Barnhill is traditionally a middle grade author, but I'd say her first adult title is a success. This is a fascinating tale set in America in the 1950s, but it's not America as you'd know it. In 1955, there was an event called the Mass Dragoning, in which hundreds of thousands of women spontaneously turned into dragons and disappeared, leaving burnt houses behind them, and sometimes their husbands were also mysteriously gone. But no one talked about it. The subject was taboo, despite this not being the first instance of women turning into dragons, meaning it definitely isn't the last. Any research on the topic is quickly put to a stop and destroyed or redacted to the point of uselessness, and anyone on the project loses their job and is blackballed from further positions in their field. The story is told from the point of view of Alex, who was just a little girl when the mass dragoning happened, but we do see some of the effects it had on people as it touched her family closely. Readers follow Alex into her early years of college and experience the various societal changes that happen over the years due to women turning into dragons. I think Barnhill did a good job of presenting how society handled tough topics during these years, while also presenting it in a way that feels timely for today.
Okay, so I have a couple of historical fiction to share. The first is Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. This is set in Alabama in the 1970s. Sybil Townsend is a nurse who works at a family planning clinic, and she really thinks she's going to be able to help the women of her community with their reproductive health issues. But then what she eventually finds out is that some of the women, and especially girls, are being given birth control without them knowing it. And some of them are even have been sterilized against their wishes or without their knowledge. It is heartrending. It's hard stuff to read, but Sybil really gets involved in the story of two young girls who this happened to. They are 12 and 14 years old, and when this clinic sterilizes them because one of them smiled at a boy. So it follows a lawsuit that happens. The whole book is based on the story of the Ralph sisters who, this was a true story. It happened, and eventually a lawsuit was brought by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Great historical fiction, and you just love the characters, and they are so strong and so amazing. They carry you through the tough story. And my other historical fiction is Women of Light by Kali Fajardo Anstein. You might know her as the author of the short story Sabrina and Karina, which was a National Book Award finalist. She's a Denver author. This is her first full-length novel, and it follows the Lopez family from northern New Mexico or southern Colorado up, and then eventually up into when they move into Denver in the 1930s. It's very atmospheric. I felt like I was walking down streets in Denver at that time. Also very difficult. Denver at that time, the Klan was still very active. They were not allowed to ride streetcars. They were not allowed, well, they were allowed in the white sections of town because they had to walk there to get laundry to do. But Luz, our main character, kind of teaches herself to type so she can become kind of a secretary at a law firm, and really tries to make something of herself. Again, very, very atmospheric. And if you're a Denver resident, you have to read this.
Good evening. My first title is The Other Dr. Gilmore, Two Men, a Murder, and an Unlikely Fight for Justice. This is nonfiction, true crime, and was published in March of this year. I listened to the audiobook and highly recommend it. A new doctor comes to a small town to take over a medical practice. It just so happens his last name is the same as the previous doctor at this practice, and no relation. The medical practice became available after the elder Dr. Gilmore was sentenced to life in prison. The locals in this community are very devoted to the first Dr. Gilmore and just can't imagine that he is guilty of the crime that put him behind bars. The younger Dr. Gilmore begins a quest. He investigates, interviews, and eventually meets and begins a relationship with the other Dr. Gilmore. Part mystery, part suspense. I rated this title 5 stars. That's pretty rare for me. I wrote, this book grabbed my attention from the start and kept me intrigued to the end. A beautiful yet really difficult relationship between two doctors who happen to share the same name. When the elder Dr. Gilmore landed in prison, he claimed his brain was just not working right. What results is a determined fight for justice and for healthcare. All the while, barriers are broken, bonds are formed. A great selection for book club, solid discussion.
All right, Cicada. Ben feels lost. He breaks it off with his fiancée and explores the reality of his sexual orientation through a string of one-night stands. He spirals into depression, hypochondria, and is stressed to the point of his hair falling out. One day at a local bookstore, he runs into Sam, effectively interrupting his spiral. They fall in love, but more importantly, they fall into intimacy. They share themselves openly and without fear, sharing their traumas and abuses with one another. In the end, they encourage each other to grow and be the best person they each can be. Both of them, much like a cicada, have spent much of their lives hidden underground, but finally found the right time and space to come out and spread their wings. This film was slated to premiere at the BFI Flair London LGBTIQ+ Film Festival in 2020, but instead premiered later at Outfest due to the pandemic, and is a great pick for Pride Month as it has a very positive portrayal of a same-sex couple.
See Them Run by Marion Todd. I know we have mystery readers out there in our audience, and I'm happy and excited to tell you about a new to me mystery series, which I hope might be new to you as well. I stumbled on the first book in our Hoopla offerings. I needed something to listen to and check this out. We have all the first 5 in the series in Hoopla, and we've ordered some actual books of this series. It's set in St. Andrews, Scotland, and features DI Detective Inspector Claire Mackay. The other members of Claire's team are all fully realized and interesting characters. We get to know them, and we see Claire through various relationships throughout the series. The first book was published in 2019, and the 6th one comes out next month, July 7th. So either she had them all written or she writes very fast. Her fans hope she'll write some more. The author narrates the audiobooks in her lovely Scottish accent. And yes, Allison's been listening as well, and we both love them. See Them Run, this first one in the series, features people that are being killed in hit and run accidents. And Claire and her team have to figure out, are these related and who could be doing these murders? I think you'll enjoy this series if you like books, for instance, by Anne Cleeves, also some of them set in Scotland, or Deborah Crombie, those kinds of mysteries. So I hope you'll like these.
All right, this is Wahala by Nikki May. It was published in January of this year. Wahala is a captivating story that centers around four mixed-race Nigerian British ladies. The original three, Ronki, Simi, and Boo, are thrown into a whirlwind when Simi's childhood friend Isabel enters the scene. This novel did a great job at exploring ways in which people's presented lives can be quite different from what is really going on behind the scenes. I really appreciated how each woman was at different stages in life, but still maintained strong friendships and supported each other. It was really refreshing to me to not have any one character seem too perfect. They all had problems and made poor decisions that made them seem all the more real. The word Wahala means trouble, which is an absolutely fitting name for this book. There's trouble around every corner, and the reasons behind all of it makes for some wonderful twists. I also found myself getting quite hungry reading this book, as there was much talk and description about food. Thankfully, the end of the book had a couple of recipes, so the more adventurous cook might try their hand and taste the most mentioned dishes.
Love that cover. Okay, Iona Iversons' Rules for Commuting. Oh, what a delight. Written by Claire Pooley. I saw the author interviewed, and while she lives outside of London and was grateful to be able that she has a job where she could work at home during the pandemic and not have the long commute, after a while she realized she missed her commute. She missed seeing all the people on the train and speculating about what their lives were like and who they were, where were they going to work and things. But of course, in London especially, but in any major city, you don't talk to people on the train. You just don't do it. But this book is based on the idea that Iona starts talking to people on the train and just freaks them out. Iona's an absolute crazy character. She rides the train every morning with her dog, even though it's standing room only. Her dog gets a seat. She brings in her voluminous bag, that's all her big pink bags on the cover, a thermos of tea with a cup and saucer, because the only way to drink tea is from a cup and saucer. And on her return home each evening, she has a glass tumbler, another thermos with a premixed gin and tonic and lime in it, so she may enjoy her after dinner cocktail. And that just gives you a hint of her personality. It's not all happiness, because each of the people she gets involved with on the train and just really pushes herself into their lives, they all have a lot of problems and issues in their lives, but really kind of lots of happy endings. This is the ultimate in uplit, which is uplifting fiction. It was just a delight for me. I spent a very happy weekend immersed in this book.
Okay, The Younger Wife by Sally Hepworth. Australian author Sally Hepworth is back with another thriller. You may remember this author from The Good Sister or The Mother-in-Law. This time, she's back with a surgeon named Stephen, ready to marry a much younger woman, hence the title. She is his interior designer, but first, he must divorce his current wife, who happens to be suffering from advanced stages of dementia. This story is told from three perspectives. Two of them are Stephen's daughters, Rachel and Tully. They are not exactly thrilled that their father wants to marry a woman quite a bit younger even than them. And the third perspective is Heather, the younger wife. The book opens at the wedding of Stephen and Heather, and in attendance is Pamela, the now ex-wife of Stephen. After the ceremony, the book fills in backstory as to how all the characters arrived at this wedding day. Secrets are revealed and family dysfunction abounds in this one. This book was a page-turner for me as I continued to guess those twists and turns, and the ending provided great fodder for discussion and dissection. Taylor Jenkins Reid said, "This book is another knockout, unputdownable and completely thrilling."
I liked it too, Julie. I had a lot of fun with that book. So my next two, actually, I have a couple of nonfiction choices here. The first one, A Most Beautiful Thing, the true story of America's first all-Black high school rowing team by Arshay Cooper. It's his memoir of a group of young, mostly Black men from Chicago's West Side who stay after high school to become rowers. The area is one of poverty and drug use and gang violence. If you know anything about crew or rowing, maybe some of you've read The Boys in the Boat about the University of Washington crew team. You'll know it has been primarily a white, and I would say preppy sport. Cooper, who is now a motivational speaker and proponent of rowing, shows how the discipline and teamwork turned his and some of his friends' lives around. Since theirs was the only crew team in the area, they had to travel to races around the eastern United States, which further expanded their horizons. You might also enjoy the very inspiring documentary of the same name, which is available to view on Amazon Prime. And we have made a book club kit of this for book clubs to discuss. I think there's quite a bit to talk about in this book. It was very inspiring. It's just a lovely book. And so my next nonfiction is The Ride of Her Life, the true story of a woman, her horse, and their last chance journey across America. We had a very lively conversation about this book at the Nonfiction Book Club. You're probably familiar with some of Elizabeth Lett's other books, previous books, The Perfect Horse, The $80 Champion, and her novel Finding Dorothy. This book tells an engaging story of Annie Wilkins. Annie was broke and could no longer keep her small Maine farm going. So having always wanted to see the Pacific Ocean, she saddled up her horse Tarzan, gathered her few belongings and her dog, and set out from Maine in November 1954. She spent the next 18 months traveling on horseback, crossing the United States with no GPS or cell phone. We all at the book club really enjoyed this glimpse of life in America in the 1950s as seen from horseback. The highway system was just being developed, and Annie relied on help for food and lodging from people she met along the way, food and lodging for her and her animals, which grew to include 2 horses. And she went all the way to California. This was a very interesting story of what is definitely a bygone era in the States.
Little change of pace here. To this one.
Yes, so here we have In Every Generation by Kendari Blake. This is a young adult title published in January of this year. Here we return to the Buffyverse with young adult author Kendari Blake. Blake has brought us back to Sunnydale with a whole new Scooby gang, though they do have ties to the original. This is a fun read for old and new fans alike. There are some references to the Buffy the Vampire Slayer show, but it is also written in a way that new fans can read the book and understand what is going on without having seen the show. This book was written much like how the show was run. There was one mystery solved within the story, but it also had an overarching big bad that will go across multiple books, which will hopefully keep readers coming back for more. The characters were all really fun, and it was great to see them trying to balance their new ties to the supernatural world with just being normal teenagers.
Okay, this is The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich. In this book, everyone who's 22 or over receives a box on their front door one day with a string in it. And eventually they figure out that the string is a measure of their life, how long they're going to live. And those strings found you everywhere. If you were camping, it was outside your tent. If you're in jail, it found you there. And so then people start thinking about, what does it mean? What am I going to do? Should I get married and plan on having children if I got a short string? Will employers hire people who have a short string? Is it worth them? And they even start to be called as short stringers is the name. So it's really about prejudice and life decisions. There's so much to think about. I know Pamela loved this also. There's people scheming. Some people don't open their boxes. Some people try stealing someone else's box, but none of it matters. Perfect for book clubs. Great character development. We follow a few people in particular and how it affects their life. And they never do. We don't know who is sending these strings. Is it God? Is it aliens? Is it people's imagination? Are we in some alternative universe? Fascinating book.
Okay, next up is Counterfeit by Kirsten Chen. And this happens to be Reese's book club pick for this month, June. I first heard about this book months ago on a podcast. The author was promoting the title at the time, And I knew this was a book for me. Designer handbags? Oh, yes, please. Fake designer handbags made so well that you never know they were fake. Oh my. Ava stays home with her little one and after having a high-powered career as an attorney. She's a Stanford grad, surgeon husband, and all seems to be quite ideal. Then Winnie reappears. Winnie is a former classmate at Stanford and has a business proposal for Ava. She asks and entices her to aid in the movement of high-end luxury handbags to the US from China. However, these handbags are replicas of designer models. No one can tell the difference. What could be the harm in swapping out a few handbags, right? Winnie needs someone with a US passport to help her manage this business. Someone who would never be suspected of wrongdoing. Someone just like Ava. But you know that saying, if something's too good to be true, it probably is. What happens when the questions continue and their scheme is threatened? How will Ava untangle the connections she's made and make good on the wrongs she's been involved in? Fun fact for you, this story was bid on by 8 movie studios, and it will be made into a movie by Sony's TriStar Pictures.
Okay, Mogul Mowgli. Zed, a British Pakistani rapper, just got invited on his first world tour, but he goes from on top of the world to completely buried as he falls into a mysterious chronic illness, which ends up being a debilitating autoimmune disease. As he moves back into his parents' house, relying on them for embarrassing tasks such as using the toilet, he's haunted by what could have been, as well as the evil eye watching his every move. He's replaced on tour, and his replacement confronts him, or rather, he's confronted with the reality of being replaced, and it finally becomes real, the crushing weight of living with a life-altering illness with no end in sight. Additionally, his relationships dissolve as he grapples with mental health issues associated with the weight of chronic illness. This is a great film to build empathy for those who struggle with chronic illness and to also give a different perspective on what it's like behind the scenes, like when a celebrity announces they're stepping back from the public while facing physical or mental health issues.
Oh, The Girls of Flight City by Lorraine Heath. I think this is one of the best World War II novels inspired by true events, one of the newer ones. It reveals, it's one of those World War II novels that reveals the hidden stories or the forgotten stories of brave women. So it is based on true events. In 1941, a flight school in Texas began training British RAF pilots. Jessie Lovelace's family airstrip became the flight school. She wanted nothing more than to become a flight instructor. She does, and becomes close to a British officer. Her younger sister, Kitty, loves going to the dances with the pilots, but doesn't always guard her heart. And fearless Rhonda Monroe shares her skills in the flight simulator. I flew through this lively story of family life and love back home in the States during the women doing their part for the war effort. It's set against the big background of the war across the ocean, but it's full of the small details of daily life for the women in Texas there who were determined to make a difference. It's a good choice for book clubs who like to read about forgotten women and family and love and sadness during a war. We've made a book club kit of it that you all could borrow for your book clubs if you'd like. So that's The Girls of Flight City.
Oh, so some of you may know Tanya, who often hosts our book parties and always has she's a children's librarian, but always has a few good thrillers to talk about. She couldn't be here tonight, but I promised to talk about her favorite one she's read recently, The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark. The main character is Meg, or Maggie, or Melody. We're not really sure what her name is because she's a con artist. She's been a life coach, a real estate agent, a college student, and she has scammed a lot of people. And she destroyed one family's lives. 10 years later, Kat, the daughter from that family, is looking for revenge, and she is going to try to con the con artist. Tanya's recommendation for us. And then I have another one, Remarkably Bright Creatures. I read the pre-publication version of this in January and declared it my favorite book of 2022. It doesn't matter what else I read. This will probably still be it. It is a read with Jenna pick, so many of you may have already heard of it. It's so popular. This is partially narrated by an octopus named Marcellus. He lives in an aquarium and he has learned everything there is to know about humans from listening and watching people. An older woman is working at the aquarium, cleaning at night, just trying to fill up her life. Her son died somewhat mysteriously many years ago. Her husband has passed away. Her friends are trying to pressure her to move into some kind of senior living thing, but she doesn't want to, and she really forms a bond with Marcellus. Marcellus actually figures out what happened to her son many years ago and has to try to figure out a way to communicate with Tova without actually, of course, having the language skills. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me, you will fall in love with this book. You will have a major crush on Marcellus. And if you don't believe me, ask Pamela, ask Julie. They will all back me up. One of the best books of the year.
I will warn people that I found it difficult toward the end. It's difficult to read while crying with glasses on. Just saying.
The audio, I'm sorry, it was someone else's turn, but I have to still add, the audiobook is amazing. The woman who does the main part of the narration is great, that's fine, but it is the man who does Marcellus the octopus. I mean, I was 3 minutes in and I was like, oh, Marcellus, I love you. So do the audio.
Highly recommended as well. One of my favorites thus far in 2022. My next title is The Golden Couple. This is a fiction domestic thriller dealing with family life, marriage, and divorce. This came out earlier this year in March. This is from the writing duo of Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pecan. You may know them from their debut hit The Wife Between Us or An Anonymous Girl and You Are Not Alone. Marissa and Matthew are a married couple and their marriage is struggling. They're looking for help and they find Avery, a therapist with very unconventional methods for helping. In fact, her methods are so unconventional, it is probably most likely why she is an unlicensed therapist. Throughout their sessions and time together, secrets are revealed and past discretions are discovered. This book is told from multiple points of view and also in 3 parts. I wrote, wow, was a wild ride from the start. Twists and turns abound. A suburban DC couple struggling in their marriage seeks out counseling to unpack what is really at the core of their issues. Unique occurrences impact their progress, and readers are left guessing who really is in control. This is a solid selection for book clubs. Great if you love a book that keeps you guessing until the very end, and a true nail biter.
Hive is based on a true story of women in Kruša e Mada, Albania during the Kosovo War. On March 26, 1999, Serbian troops rounded up townspeople and separated the men from the women and children. From the men, the soldiers took a selection, about 240 total, from Kruša e Mada, who were never seen or heard from again. A total of 1,600 people are still unaccounted for from this massacre. There are theories of drownings in transportation vehicles, executions in the woods, mass graves, all unconfirmed, but the efforts are ongoing 23 years later to find answers. This movie stars Farie, frantically searching body bags for her husband, desperate for answers or at least closure. Back at home, Farie cares for her 2 children and aging father-in-law. She helps run a local women's organization to help empower other widows like her figure out how to provide for their families in the wake of the loss of their husbands, but it's a patriarchal town that has turned their backs on them. Despite her grief, she turns her casual beekeeping and cooking into a successful business. However, she's not making much selling her goods at the local market because her father-in-law has to sell the goods for her as the man, and he's a terrible salesman. Instead, Farie works hard to get her driver's license and encourages the other widows to do the same so they can travel into the city to find work, since their town won't allow them the opportunity. However, men throw rocks through her windows while she's driving, assault her, and she's labeled as the town lunatic. The hatred of the men in town stings, similar to her bees. With her own image already soiled, she collects the townswomen and creates a successful business, selling her and the other women's goods to local supermarkets. Suddenly, these grieving families are no longer stricken with horrible poverty. While this Triple Sundance Award-winning film is fictional, it is great for those who are interested in the human side of the impacts of the brutality of war, especially relevant today since this is set in a Slavic country. It is particularly poignant in understanding the grief and daily struggles survivors of war are forced to endure.
Oh, good. Vacation Land by Meg Mitchell Moore. Finally, a fun summer read, a little lighter than some I've talked about, set in Maine on the ocean shore, of course. Louisa brings her 3 kids to her parents' home to help her mother care for her father as he slides further into dementia. She and her kids come from New York, where her husband has stayed to try to get his business off the ground. Will Louisa's husband ever join them in Maine, or is there something else keeping him at home? The kids have, of course, a great time playing on the beach and going boating and fishing, and they were my favorite characters, actually, I think. Another young woman has also arrived in Maine this summer. Christy's mother has recently died. She is broke and trying to get away from her past mistakes, and she may have a connection to Louisa's family. Will she be able to find a job and keep her new and almost too good to be true boyfriend in Maine? As with all satisfying beach reads, secrets are revealed and family relationships reshaped. Authors Ellen Hildebrand and Jennifer Weiner also have recently published summer books, but I liked this one the best. That's Vacation Land.
All right. Woman Eating by Claire Coda, I believe, is going to have to be my favorite book of this year, even though there's still 6 months to go. It was published in April of 2022. Woman Eating is not your average vampire story. This is more of a character study full of millennial ennui. I absolutely loved the exploration of how our relationships or non-existent relationships with our parents affect us. Lydia, or Lyd as she prefers, has had to put her vampire mother in a senior living home, so she is on her own for the first time in her life. She's having to navigate how to find food on her own, while also coming to terms with what she wants to eat, and if she wants to change her diet. Her mother only ever allowed pig's blood, because it was all they deserved, blood from an animal her mother deemed dirty. Lyd is navigating a lot of the trauma and negative feelings about who and what she is that was passed down from her mother. There is a lot of introspection and research into why her mother might have felt that way, a wonderful understanding of where her mother is coming from, but that she does not have to subscribe to the same beliefs. Lyd also dreams a lot about what she might eat if she were human. Would she eat Japanese food to feel more connected to her father, who she never knew as he died before she was born? Would she shun her heritage from her mother and father and strictly eat British food? So the commentary on food and how it ties us to community is also chef's kiss. I could say so much more about this title, but I'll leave it at give it a try. This is a title that will linger long after you finish the last page.
Great. That is all of our books and movies for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.